Welcome in. Crazy week when it comes to the SDH network universe. John Nelson is away being high school football John Nelson on Georgia Public Broadcasting all week with the championships going on. So we're not doing live shows in the normal sense, but news happens at all times. So we've got to break in and cover it. Atlanta United has a new head honcho, and we'll get into the title. We'll get into all of that. And it's Mondays, so we have to catch up with Abe Gordon of 92.9 The Game. What's going on, Abe?
Not much, man. I was out there this weekend at the Father Christmas Cup at Silverbacks Park doing my best to represent SDH. Pay no mind to the record and performance, but we were out there. We had fun. It was packed and loaded, and everyone was having a good time. And most importantly, no one got too injured, I don't believe. So that's good news.
No one got too injured, you
I'm
don't
very
believe.
sore. I'm very sore today, but I'm not hurt. And so that's what's important.
There is a difference, and that's a very important difference. That's one of the great events in Atlanta soccer every year, and soccer down here always supports it and spreads the word, and we're excited that that will continue on and can't wait to get involved in the 2025 edition. They always help families in need in the Atlanta soccer community. The news today is not a shock. It's not really that much of a surprise. The general manager search for Atlanta United hasn't had a lot of names attached to it because I think it's been kind of a foregone conclusion that Chris Henderson would be the primary target. And now that target has been acquired. He is a member of Atlanta United as the chief soccer officer and sporting director. Just reaction from you about Chris Henderson moving from Inter Miami to Atlanta United.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't it be the hire, right? Like, it's one thing if you're going back to something that didn't work elsewhere and try and justify it. This has worked. Like in multiple cities, it has worked for Chris Henderson. It has certainly worked with the combination of Garth and Chris in Seattle. So it does make a ton of sense. And quite frankly, I know we'll talk about potentially head coach hiring, stuff like that. It is such a massive offseason from the front office perspective that this is – you would argue maybe a more important hire, at least in the immediacy, based on what you could do over this winter and what could be coming to Atlanta United. So, we've all kind of talked about it. Like it just fits nicely in there. And it's kind of like a blanket or an old sweatshirt that it's a warm, fuzzy feeling for Garth Lagerwey to be partnered with Chris Henderson. But I mean, you can run through it more than I can, but you look at what he was able to accomplish in Seattle. They made the playoffs every single year, like 12 straight seasons or something like that. They got MLS Cups and Supporter Shields and U.S. Open Cup 4 times. And even with Miami, they got Leagues Cup and all this stuff. I mean, the success and the path to success is there. And look, Garth said it way back when you guys were talking to him during one of the pregame shows. We're looking for someone that understands the MLS, that understands the nuances is a good word here of this league and the roster rules and some of the limitations. And certainly he has that. And so I'm excited. I think we're all pretty optimistic about what this team can be coming off of how they finished out this season. You get an opportunity to spend some more money. And that's the other exciting thing here is he's kind of been shopping at the bargain bin, if we're going to be honest, a little bit. Maybe not recently, obviously, in Miami. That's a whole different story.
In a way, yeah, in Miami. It's complicated. We'll get to that.
But, I mean, look, we've seen Atlanta United's got, 5 of the 7 biggest transfer fees in MLS history. And so I wouldn't find any reason to say that they wouldn't add a 6 out of 8 or something with one of their decisions here. So, I mean, it's really a blank slate for him to come in and kind of put it together in his vision, but with what I feel is a pretty good base already there. I mean, we talked about some of the other decisions that have just happened just last week. I think it's awesome to see Jamal Tiare and Ronald Hernandez back with his team. And you kind of get a new coaching staff, new front office, but there's familiarity. Goose is back. Tiare and Hernandez in whatever role they're going to have is back. And obviously Hernandez, because we won't know the exact status of Brooks Lennon early in the season, is going to play itself a role there too. It just feels like you're starting to come together and you're starting to see a little bit of it take shape, but with the knowledge that there's so much more to come. That's what excites me, is just the potential of what Chris Henderson's going to have just with decision-making and roster management really in his first couple of weeks here.
Yeah, you brought up the time in Seattle, and I think that's important, and that's going to get a lot of the headlines, and it should, because you're talking about working with Garth Lagerwey there, just a resume of success during their both of their times with the Seattle Sounders. But his time in Miami is fascinating to me because, yeah, they spent a lot of money, but that really wasn't anything that Chris Henderson went out and did. I mean, Chris Henderson didn't scout Lionel Messi. Like, Messi shows up, he's going to get to bring in some of his buddies as well. So, where I thought Henderson did an amazing job in Miami is with a couple of other moves. And I think it's important in an MLS context. And we talk about understanding the league and understanding the rules. And for Chris, I mean, you're talking about somebody who played in the league, predated MLS in terms of playing for the U.S. men's national team, but played in the league and has been involved in the league every year it has existed. So he knows how it's progressed. He knows how it's grown. He knows all of those nooks and crannies that Demetrios in the front office knows as well about being cap compliant and building a team that maximizes the cap. He did that with two really important moves in Miami, in my opinion. One is the college draft. And we saw Philadelphia this past week trade all of their picks for 3 years for $500,000 in GAM. Well, the most important player for Miami in the postseason was the one that they lost. And since that point, Atlanta dominated the series and knocked them out. Yannick Bright. Yannick Bright was a draft pick, and he was essential to that team because they spent a lot on Messi. They spent a lot on Suarez. They spent a lot on Alba. They spent a lot on Busquets. Designated player spots gone. Tam gone. Everything that you can do on the top end gone. You had to hit on some of those lower end roster guys. Yannick Bright is a prime example. I think what they did as well to maximize that space as much as possible with moving DeAndre Yedlin to Cincinnati and then going out and getting Marcelo Wygant on loan. Wygant's not DeAndre Yedlin. I don't think it's a massive drop off, but it's a massive drop off in cap hit. And you were able to then take some of that money into other spots of the roster on some of the top end guys that are going to come along with Lionel Messi that you have to accept if you're Chris Henderson in that spot. I thought what he did to rebuild that team after all of the sanctions that they had before his tenure started and made them competitive before Messi arrived, then was able to maximize the time with Messi, won a supporter shield, won a Leagues Cup. I think he did an amazing job in Miami. And that's important here in a situation where you're going to spend, but you're also going to need to hit on some of those bottom end roster guys that, as we've seen in this league, you're going to need them at some point in the season to contribute in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at what Atlanta United and the depth that was tested, especially along the back line over the course of the season. You just can't have enough of some of these players who you can trust. Some of the guys that you can pull in either from your academy or from your twos, whatever it is that are you're developing and are young and still working their way there. So there's no doubt about that. Let me ask you a question, Jason. What do you think is the biggest task for him as he comes in? I know we got the coach hire coming up, eventually. And I don't know if this is a decision that he's going to have full input on or it's already been made and he's kind of getting read into it. But if you separate the coach hire itself, is it as simple as like the two DPs are the biggest decision he's going to have to make and the biggest stamp, or am I overlooking something?
No, I think that's it. There's others, but those are the ones because in this league, if you don't hit on your designated players, it is so much harder to succeed. If you do, you've got guys who win games for you. You've got guys
Yeah.
who win points for you and just really set your place in the table. The coaching hire, I think, to update it, because that conversation has been going around since this rumor broke about Chris Henderson late yesterday. We know from Garth Lagerwey speaking to us all season long on our Five Stripes Countdown shows that they have done coaching interviews. They did them back before decision day. I don't know what they've done since then to now, but we know that Garth spoke about that.
Well, I remember one of the interviews he specifically, and this was like a month ago or 6 weeks ago. So it felt like a long time then. Now we're here in it's mid-December. It's not a long time now. I remember he's like, we want someone hired and in place before Christmas. And again, back
Yeah.
then I was like, man, that's so far away. We're really going to wait that long. But again, now we're talking about 9 days.
Yeah.
And so that timeline, I would expect it to come pretty quickly now.
Yeah, I think he said that early on, and then he reiterated that at the end of the season after the decision not to retain Rob Valentino came out. So that's been said a couple of times.
Mhm.
There is time between now and then. We know that Patrick Vieira was a candidate at one point. At least that's what was reported. The
Right.
team's never going to confirm or deny any of that. But we know he has a job now. So take him out of the mix. Beyond that, I don't know. So I don't know if Chris Henderson will impact that move unless it's down to a decision between one or two people. And I think he'll give input, but he hasn't been part of that process. So I think that's moved independently of him. They haven't waited on this hire to hire the coach. I think a lot of times this comes up in all sports. We think that you hire that general manager and then they're going to do these other things. You can't wait. You have to be moving in different paths to get these things done. They have to be able to work together, but you got to get things done. Let's go a step further. So the designated players, for sure, that's the move, and that path has already been started as well. You don't start scouting today to sign guys in January. You've got lists. I'm sure he's got lists, and you're gonna start comparing notes, and you're gonna start comparing what you know and who knows what, and what new information you might have in the building now with Chris Henderson there. So those are essential. The positions that those fill are essential as well. Striker, I would assume, would be one. The other one, is it a winger? Is it a central midfielder /10 and play Moranchuk wide, which is something that Garth talked about in his end of the season availability and something that we did see a little bit late in the season. It's something Moranchuk's done in his career, so that's possible. That will probably be impacted by the way that the coach is going to want to play. I think in this league, you're not going to get a lot of Rumen who come in and are very structured and I want to play this formation. I want to play this way, and I got to find players to fit that. I think you have to be adaptable, but everybody has things that they like. And if you want a Moranchuk on the right side cutting in on his left foot, that's something you want to activate in this team. Okay, that means Saba would go to the left side and cut in on his right foot. All right, you get narrow there. You've got fullbacks who can stretch the field, so you can play that way. But then you need a different kind of central midfielder as your other designated player. Garth also mentioned potentially defense for a big investment this offseason. So while the designated players are going to be the headlines that Chris Henderson will help write, I think there's a couple other moves underneath that will be really success in 2025.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back and think like who from this past what we assume is the starting 11 is kind of locked in, and there are some questions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Pedro Amador, is he your left back every single day? You think if he is, that would be an area maybe you would have looked at, but if you have Brooks and him and they're locked in, then they're locked in, and you can move with Stian and Derek Williams and take the next step forward, and you get into the midfield. And I know you've talked about it for a while about Jay Fortune and the development. It feels like an everyday starter to me.
Yeah,
and so that means maybe Moyamba takes a step back. Obviously, you lose McCarty, but Sleesh and the job he did, and you take the next step forward. And you mentioned it, it was the same discussion we had. And even though the team went on a decent run of success towards the end of the year, the discussion didn't change about that left side. You were getting input from Amador, which is something you didn't necessarily have earlier in the season. But what was going on up top and who's going to be your left attacker was still a mess. It really was. And so suggesting what you do, move Saba over there and get Moranchuk and someone else to replace him. And look, it's nice you brought back TRA. It doesn't feel like he's your one.
No, I don't think he is. I think he's a really good two, but
yeah,
not a one.
Of course. And so to me, it makes sense what you're suggesting, that it's in the midfield or it's up top. I just don't know where in the back it would be, because you got, and again, like we go back to what Pedro Amador was brought in here for, and we're like, he was kind of brought in, and maybe the team had other ideas, but like as a fan, as a follower, you're just like, well, they know they're going to lose Caleb for the youth tournaments and blah blah blah, and it kind of gives you some depth there, and then all of a sudden Wiley's gone and he's just playing. Ronald Hernandez had gotten hurt, and he's just playing, and he's playing out of his mind, especially those last 8-10 games.
Yeah.
I don't know if the team necessarily viewed him as like a long-term solution, and I'm not long-term.
I don't
whatever
think that they did. I think
but
he
that's what it's
really
become.
changed that. Yeah, and that's going to be a question. Can he sustain that? Can he play at that level or even better in 2025? Or do you go back to kind of the thought process when he was signed, I think, to be a reserve rotation left back and not be the everyday starter? I do think you maybe need to think about your center back core. Remember, Garth Lagerwey talked about Noah Cobb potentially playing some right back. That's been a topic, and we'll see if that happens. Noah has the tools to do it. He just hasn't. He's never played on that side, and I would question, how much he's going to be able to contribute to the team getting forward. We know right back with Brooks Lennon, there's a heavy expectation in creating and joining the attack. Noah's never been asked to do that. He's got the pace, he's got the technical ability, I think, but that's an adaptation. We'll just have to see. Hernandez gives you cover, but Derek Williams is another year older. I thought he finished the year really strong. Stian Gregerson has had injury issues.
Yeah.
And you have to think about, do I need a center back this year that maybe comes in and rotates with those three? Luis Abram is still under contract. I wonder if he will be here with this team in 2025. If he is, maybe you don't need this player, or if you've decided you need this player, then maybe you make that move. But maybe you need a center back that you think rotates for a year and then replaces Williams, competing along the while with Cobb, with potentially Abram, with Efrain Morales, with that group.
Yeah, that was always the one where it felt like you were blocked, right? Like, well, I think we have very high hopes and very high potential ceilings for both Morales and Cobb. And the question is just like, they're kind of blocked. And yes, they kind of got ran in every once in a while when Stian would get hurt. And I know for a stretch, Derek was also hurt the earlier portions of the season. But now, assuming they get back healthy, you're like, when are these guys going to get play time, and how much can they actually develop if you are using them with the twos? Is the level, it just probably isn't high enough for them to continually advance it. There'll certain things you can work on, but
yeah, you'll maintain, but you don't necessarily grow. Yeah.
And it's just like, man, when are these guys going to get the opportunity? And if not, are you better served sending them elsewhere, either by trade or just a loan where they can actually improve and pick up some more experience. So it's a very tricky situation, because like this year, you really needed that depth along the back line, really at all four positions. And I know Brooks he had the one game he missed due to red card or yellow card, and then played every other minute of every game until his shoulder injury. So turned out you needed all four positions you even went five in the back at various times. And so that's the one piece of depth that I do feel you're pretty good at. How you manage it, though, and what you're asking them to do, as you're suggesting, maybe could throw some wrinkles in. But, I mean, to me, when I look at the back line depth, that's probably where you're strongest, especially up the middle with Morales, Cobb, and Abram. You feel comfortable there, but guys are just sitting on the bench and not improving, and you got to find time to get guys run, or you're stunting development of guys that could be, as you're suggesting, the next guy at that position. But if they only played 5 games in the season, and the U.S. Open Cup or Leagues Cup or whatever it is that enough? Is that justifying keeping them on the roster at this point?
Yeah, it's tricky, and I'm glad you mentioned that possible development that might see somebody like Efrain Morales, for example, maybe get loaned out this season and play, because I think you're talking about a player who's a little bit of a late bloomer because of injury issues. I thought he grew a lot in terms of ability and confidence in the last 18 months or so. You're talking about a full Bolivian international now as well. He's made his senior national team debut at this stage. You know, going back and forth with the twos and getting games is okay, but is there another level for him? I think potentially there is. So you don't want
Yeah.
to give up on him, but you want to get him more developmental time than just going to play for the twos. So if you do that, then you might need to go get some extra depth because you wouldn't have him in the mix. That's where it gets really fascinating. And that's where into the nitty gritty of what Chris Henderson will be doing
Well,
is making those kinds of decisions.
the other name I want to ask you about is Matt Edwards,
Yeah.
and just what role we can expect from him. Is it something maybe similar to what Jay Fortune had this season, where it's kind of a slow build? You kind of get thrust in because other players maybe aren't quite performing, but this is a guy that we've been talking about, and I really had my first experiences with him just this season. I know you've seen a lot more of them. But is this a guy that's also ready for that next step, and where would he fit in based on what you're able to put out there right now?
Yeah, that's a good shout, and I'll throw Aiden Torres into the mix
Yeah.
as well, who got a little bit of Open Cup time. He's played some right back with Atlanta United too this season. Played there a good bit down the stretch, so maybe you start to factor him in. Although he's played mostly as a 6 or an 8, and that's where he's played for the U18s this fall. But that right back experience maybe puts him in the mix. So like, let's just start with Edwards and Cobb and Torres and Hernandez, all possible options to play in place of Brooks Lennon while he's out. So you're talking about preseason, you're talking about, I don't know, maybe a month into the season, maybe 2 months into the season. I don't think we really know exactly how long Lennon's going to be out at this stage. Edwards can play right back. He can play as a center back in a 3 center back setup. He can play left back as well. That was one of his big things at North Carolina, was his versatility, playing all across the back line. He's athletic. He's good on the ball. I thought he got better on the ball this season at the pro level, playing with Atlanta United too. Good leader, versatile. That's going to be big factors for him. I think it is similar to Jay Fortune in a way, in that he's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife on the back line for right now, but he also has that expectation where he will need to go play for Atlanta United too. I think he is still developing as a professional. So if he is at times your 20th guy on the game day roster / 21st guy and not dressing at the last minute, but then in those opportunities where he can play that same weekend for Atlanta United too when they're at home, that's going to be really important because of how many positions he can fill. I don't know if he's a starter at the MLS level yet. I haven't quite seen enough of that yet. And I don't think you have to really block him into anything yet. Um, I'm curious to see, because versatility is a good thing up to a point where you're not really locked into a position. I'm curious what that best position is for him at this stage.
And I
I'm
guess
I'm leaning to right back. I'm just
right.
leaning that way, but I'm not completely there yet.
And I think all of these discussions kind of get molded by the first question you asked, and who are these two DPs, and where do they slide
Yep.
in? Because if they're both in the attack, does that open a midfield slot? If one comes into defense, then does someone from the current defense maybe get pushed into the midfield and try and change positions in that manner? I know we've seen Brook at times play higher up the field. I think when he was here, they had Wiley switch every once in a while. Could Pedro Amador be used in that sort of manner as well? I think he may have actually been pushed up once or twice in game. I
I think
think
in
he had
game,
to,
yeah, that
yeah.
happened at least once.
And so there is some flexibility on the outside backs if that is one of the DPs. But if I'm going to be honest, I'd be a little disappointed if one of the DPs is on the back line and not towards the
Same.
front. Yeah.
Same. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. I think it's just the nature of the league. You know, when those are the guys that, and this is not to diminish anything on the back end of the team in terms of defense, goalkeeper, any of that, you're gonna spend the most money on the attacking players because often they win you games, but also they sell jerseys, they get headlines, it's PR. And when you're in this cap situation in a sport like this, you've got to go do that. You're not going to build your NBA roster on your best defender being your most expensive guy. You just can't. It's got to be somebody who can score. And I think in this league, it's the same thing. You've got to get somebody who can score and create. And you've got the opportunity now to go get two guys who can do that, to add to Saba Lobjanidze, who had a brilliant season, I think, overall. Alexei Miranchuk, who we saw flashes. We saw some really good things. I think the numbers were maybe better than the feel at times and how impactful he was. He did create a good number of chances. He was really the main guy alongside Amador in that playoff run in terms of creating opportunities for others. I think you're going to see more Miranchuk. If Saba can be at the same level, plus two more guys, that's going to allow Brooks Lennon, when he's back, to be more impactful. You're not going to be able to key on him as much. You're not going to be able to key on Amador. I think Jay Fortune has got more goals and assists in him. I think Bartosz Slisz has goals and assists in him. So when you can start to then have teams looking at Atlanta United and saying, all right, I can't just try to take away Saba. I can't try to cancel out the crosses from the wings. I got to deal with this number 9 who's going to occupy two of my center backs. I got to deal with this other guy cutting it off the wing. I got to try to prevent the ball from getting to Miranchuk. More players can be impactful when you're in that situation.
Yeah, I look, I don't pretend to know what the stats said about Miranchuk. I know I was disappointed by it, but I also understand that, hey, man, a lot of times he was held back by what was around him up top, too. And,
It's true. Very true.
and if you do upgrade those positions, he does become what may look like it was slightly overhit or steamed too much, or the vision or the knowledge of where the run should be, whatever it might be that you think didn't ultimately connect with a teammate. With a better player, maybe a higher IQ and more quality and skill, that kind of changes. And so I was disappointed, but I was also lenient, understanding some of the limitations around him.
And not
And
having
so,
a preseason, not
yeah,
being fully fit, those
right.
sorts of things, kind of playing your way
And
into
first couple of games
fitness.
in the league too, and
Yeah,
adjusting to
it's
the
tough.
MLS. Yeah,
It's tough. Like, I think Miranchuk is a guy that, it's on my wall behind me, Diego Maradona. He said something about moving to Serie A that I really feel like applies to Miranchuk. You almost have to calibrate your game to the
yeah,
league you're in. Anybody who watches different leagues, like, you'll see guys move from Serie A to the Premier League and struggle initially because the game's played at a different pace. The character of the league is different. MLS is very different. And I think you've heard it from guys like Gonzalo Higuain and many others who've come here and said, wow, I need to get my head around like what I have to do physically to compete in this league. And Miranchuk, the thing that Maradona said about Serie A that struck me is, you had to find that balance because when he went from Argentina to Italy at that time in the 80s, Serie A was faster and stronger and more physical than the Argentine league was. So he had to adapt to be able to play at that pace, but not lose what made him special, especially on the ball. We think of Maradona with goals, but it was chance creation that he was amazing at. Miranchuk, that's what he does. So he has to get used to, I might have less time on the ball. I might feel leggy because we just flew 5 hours across the country and I'm not used to that sort of thing. Like I might have to get used to playing on turf a little bit. If you're Miranchuk, the game's going to be a little bit faster. And I got to get used to these guys around me and this transition game that so many MLS games turn into, of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That takes a minute. It takes more than how many games did he play? 15 maybe across all competitions, somewhere in that ballpark?
yeah. I mean, when I go back and look at him, I think there were specific plays that I remember where you could see the quality and skill is
Yeah.
there, and
Yeah.
the
Same.
connection maybe is not. But I mean, even passes that went unfulfilled, you're like, man, like the vision to see that run that ultimately wasn't made or was hit to, whatever it was, you could still see it. And I just expect to see more and more of it as, again, if you can upgrade that position and you get more fluid and chemistry with your teammates.
I remember going into the Orlando game, the last game in the conference semifinal, and kind of going through those numbers because I mean, all postseason, I was yelling at Mike about, I don't care about stats. I don't want to talk about stats. I don't want to get into stats
I was
because
told by a coach in another sport that stats are for losers. So
I should have used that line. No, I mean, it was just the way the team was playing. Like, it wasn't about that.
yeah,
Sometimes it is. Sometimes stats can help paint a picture and tell a story. But when I was going through it, where the chances were coming from and where the shot created actions were coming from, it surprised me how many were coming from Alexi in
yeah.
games where I felt like, man, he didn't create a ton, but he created at least one big chance. And might not have been actually quantified as a technical big chance, which Opta will do, but he created a big opportunity in almost every game he played. The volume wasn't what I think we expect, and I think you'll see that over time, and especially like you said, if you get better pieces around him, then this team will be better in total, and he'll be better for all of that. Question is just where he's going to play. Is it as a 10? Is it as a right wing cutting inside, as an inverted winger? Is it on the left? I think he could do that as well. It's going to be fascinating. And a lot of that's going to come down to the coaching side of things. We haven't heard a lot of names. We haven't seen a lot with that. I'm with you in the sense that Garth has mentioned it multiple times. I think you're going to have that person in place sooner rather than later. Before Christmas was the goal. There's still time. It might not be a traditional announcement if it's next week, but I think you're getting into that kind of time frame of, okay, now you're, once that person is hired, you're still going to be shopping for designated players, but preseason starts in about a month's time from now.
Yeah, I was going to say that first preseason game I think is the end of January, and
Last
so
Saturday in January in Chattanooga, as Chattanooga FC
it's
has announced.
I saw them post the date. I was like, that's like a month from now. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, a little more, but like not that much more. And I know we had talked about it. Like, hey, there's only 7 weeks from the end of the season until when you get going again. But it still feels like it's just coming back crazy quick. And part of that might be because of these offseason decisions have taken time, and it's kind of buoyed us to this point where you're really halfway through the offseason, maybe just a tick under if you were playing an MLS Cup. But it's gone by very quick. And when someone asked me the other day, like Brooks Lennon had the shoulder issue, like how could he not be back healthy in time? I'm like, it's only like 2 months. Like it just wasn't that much time, and it just wasn't a lot of time off. But it's a long season, and that's going to happen.
It has been just a wild ride from decision day till the last game in Orlando to then, the news that Rob Valentino is not going to continue, roster announcements, and now Atlanta United has a new chief soccer officer and sporting director. If you have not seen, there will be a media availability tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. The press conference will be broadcast at atlutd.com/live. I'll be there. I think Mike will be there as well. A lot of our SDH crew will be there as well. So that's going to be tomorrow afternoon. You'll get to hear from Chris Henderson representing Atlanta United then. And look, maybe some of these other questions that we've brought up will get asked, and we'll be interested to see some of those answers. But Abe, always good to catch up with you. I'm sure we're going to have more things to talk about in the off season, so we'll be doing this again.
Yeah, well, look, unless they announce this head coach hire pretty quick, I'm out of town next week. I'm going
Oh,
back to international waters on a cruise, so I
oh,
won't be around too long. But we'll definitely connect if I'm stateside, as they say.
where are you cruising to?
We're going to it's a Panama Canal cruise, so we're
Nice.
heading down to Cologne, and we're gonna hit a couple stops on the way, and then in and out of Tampa. So looking forward to it.
Very cool. Well, enjoy that, and hopefully Atlanta United hires a coach beforehand, and we'll talk about it. Otherwise, we will reconnect after the first of the year.
I'm hoping so. New year, new calendar, and it'll be a new season by then too. So we're gonna be raring to go.
Maybe we'll have some designated players as well.
That too.
Thanks for listening, everybody out there. Plenty more coverage coming up all week long on the SDH network of Atlanta United news, other news as well. Plenty of things. So make sure you are getting your notifications on all your social media channels, and make sure you're subscribed to the SDH network YouTube channel as well for all the latest.